Yes, thank you. I shortened the title at the end. So, yeah, I'm happy to present the work.
Spoiled.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm happy to present this work, which is an idea that I have and I try to develop, which is about varieties of students' profiles and teacher assessments. So this paper is about how teachers assign grades to their students, and I think this topic is important because grades are well known to be important predictors of a huge variety of students' outcome, both in the short term, such as, for example, school dropout or college admission, but also in the long term, such as future earnings, as well as eventually life satisfaction. In this work, I focus mainly on non-cognitive dimensions and social-emotional skills of students, and I do that using a novel data set. I think, to my knowledge, is a novel data set in which I merge Italian data, in which I meant to derive information on both students' ability, teacher grades, and students' ascriptive characteristics, as well as a rich set of information on students' non-cognitive factors and social-emotional skills that are usually missing in this kind of studies. The theoretical framework behind is mainly about two different big streams of literature about grade determinants. The first one is the psychological research that mainly focuses on how students' non-cognitive skills, personality traits, attitudes, social and emotional skills are related to teacher grades. And then we have the economic literature, the economic research that focuses on how teacher expectations may vary according to students' characteristics and how teacher expectations therefore affect the grade. The psychological research mainly focuses on identifying those students' non-cognitive dimensions, soft skills, attitudes, behavior that might affect how teachers evaluate their students. So we have a lot of literature about it, really a lot, and there are a lot of different dimensions that psychological research focuses on, such as optimism, resilience, adaptability, effort, work habit, attention, self-control, self-confidence, and so on. So there's a lot of different non-cognitive skills that are supposed to influence the way in which teachers assess their students. However, there are some pitfalls with this literature, since it's very fragmented and it has never been systematized, and different studies use different operationalization for the same concept, so it's really difficult to systematize this kind of literature. Moreover, those non-cognitive factors are considered separately in this kind of study, so it seems like they do not interplay to each other, so there's a sort of additive dimension of these non-cognitive skills in determining students' teacher grades. And in this study, teacher grade is considered the main indicator of students' ability, while we know that actually teacher grade and grade is thought as an hodgepodge, so it's not really an objective dimension of students' ability, or cognitive ability of students. In this hodgepodge, a lot of different factors come into play together, and we have achievement factors and other factors such as non-cognitive traits of students. So it's like that, I thought, okay, it's likely that teacher cannot sensibly distinguish this single non-cognitive dimension of students when they grade the students, so they cannot distinguish the single non-cognitive traits from the interplay of the numerous cognitive, non-cognitive, ascriptive factors that can influence students' assessment. And moreover, we know that actually together with all this stuff, there's also teacher characteristics, students' characteristics, the context in which the relationship between the two happens, so there's a lot of factors influencing teacher grade. And then we have the economic research that focuses on grading bias, and basically it analyzes how teacher expectations about students' academic ability and non-cognitive skills vary for teachers according to students' socioeconomic background, gender, and ethnic background. So basically these expectations influence the way in which teachers assign different grades to students belonging to different groups, such as gender, socioeconomic background, and ethnic background, that have the same level of ability. This is called teacher grading bias. So we have students with the same level of ability with different grades, basically. Again, we have some pitfalls, in my opinion, so it's not possible, mainly because of a lack of data, to assess the cumulative weight of non-cognitive skills and social demographics. And those studies do not actually consider the fact that the non-cognitive skills are not randomly distributed across among students that have different socioeconomic background, gender, and ethnic background. So I propose this teacher grade function in which I have three main components plus one that I cannot address in this paper because I don't have data on teacher characteristics and the context, but I have information on students' academic ability and competencies, and I use standardized test score, INVALSI standardized test score, as a yardstick against which to compare differences in teacher assessed grades that cannot be explained by differences in students' academic ability. So I have basically students with the same INVALSI test score, but different grade. And then I have students' descriptive characteristics, and then I have this huge information on students' non-cognitive factors and social-emotional skills. So the goal of this work is trying to bridge the gap between the two literature that I mentioned before, trying to consider the interplay between non-cognitive factors among each other and the way in which they shape teacher grade. Then I want to consider the random distribution of these non-cognitive factors and social-emotional skills among the student population. And finally, I want to account for the fact that for students' objective academic competencies. Okay, to do so, I use, of course, the INVALSI data, in which I have information on 10 grade students in 3 academic years, in 2016-17, 17-18, and 18-19. And so the INVALSI, I have information on teacher grade in language, students' characteristics, and students' academic competencies in language. So I have the INVALSI test score in 10th grade, as well as in 8th grade. I managed to merge also the test score in 8th grade in language. And then I merged this data with the PISA 2018 data, in which I have information on 15 years old Italian students, and I have a lot of different information of non-cognitive soft skills, attitudes, behavior, social-emotional skills, and other objective indicators. My sample is composed by around 6,000 regular students, regular because I tried to match different years in order to capture those. So those were dropping out because it's about 15 years old, so it's not really about the grade with the PISA data. And then I have this idea about identifying in the PISA data set the main predictors of teacher grade among the set of rich non-cognitive dimensions that I have. And then with this dimension, I want to create some students' profile through latent profile analysis. So what I want to do is basically grouping my students according to their distribution of non-cognitive skills together in order to have a measure, a mix, an interplay of non-cognitive dimension that can be as close as possible to what teachers actually experience within the classroom. Then I investigate the social certification of those profiles, and finally investigate the association between these profiles and teacher assigned grades, and then the possible interaction effects with the students' descriptive characteristics. So my main independent variable are my students' profiles. Then I have as a dependent variable teacher assigned grade, and as a control, as I mentioned before, in order to get, let's say, estimates of similar students with similar competencies but different grade, I control for INVALSI test score in 10th grade and in 8th grade, and I include the descriptive characteristics, and I also include other control variables. So those are the dimensions that I selected from the PISA, so I'm not listing everything, but those are 9 dimensions, such as competitiveness, fear of failure, eudaimonia, work mastery, learning goals, self-efficacy, sense of belonging, cognitive flexibility, and attitude towards schools. So I decided to choose indexes and not single items. So I tried before with the single items, but it was a lot of work. I tried to use last regression for predicting the best items, but at the end I decided to go with these indexes in order to have as much information as I could to create my profiles. And then the difficult work was to identify this profile. So here I have all my different non-cognitive and social-emotional skills of students, and I create at the end different 4 profiles of students. And you can see that basically the distribution where the center is 0 and the board is 1 because I normalized my, my indexes. So in order to understand how my profiles are composed, who are the students within my profiles, I draw this schema in which I have a mean, and for each dimension I have the difference from the mean for each type. So for example, for competitiveness we have mean of 0.58. Type 3 is an average student in the sense of competitiveness, while type 1 has a very, very low level of competitiveness. A type 4, so profile 4, let's say, has a high level of competitiveness. So my type 1 is the 2% of the sample, but I decided to keep it anyway because no matter how many dimensions or how many profiles I try to build, type 1 was always there. So the 2% was stable, and so I decided to keep it. And it's the most strange to interpret, so maybe you can help me later on. But it has the lower level of work mastery and competitiveness, but overall it has high level of resilience and attitude towards school and adaptability. So I decided to call it the uncompetitive student. Then I have the type 2, profile 2, which is around 30% of the sample, and it has a lower level of resilience, attitude towards school, learning goals and adaptability, but overall it has no dramatic scores. So I decided to call it the cursory student, so the one that basically it's not that bad but doesn't care about school. So then I have the profile type 3, which is 52% of the sample, and it's the majority of students, so it has more or less average levels for each dimension, but it has high work mastery and high attitude towards school. So I decided to call it the conscientious type, the diligent student. And finally have the type 4, which is 17% of the sample, that has really high level of meaning in life, of resilience, work mastery, learning goals, and competitiveness, and it has basically positive school-related attitude in each dimension. So I call it the valedictorian student. So now I'm trying to understand whether gender, migratory background, and ESTS predicts the probability of belonging to these 4 profiles, and we see that actually for the uncompetitive type, there's no effect at all, significant effect at all, while female are less likely to be cursory or valedictorian students, but they are more likely to belong to the conscientious profile. Then we have no significant effect, but I think that maybe for with a larger share of immigrant students, we could have seen something there. So immigrant students are more likely to belong to the cursory type and less likely to belong to the conscientious type, and which is in line with the literature. And then we have the higher ESS students, less cursory, but more conscientious. So here I investigate the relationship between my profiles and teacher grade, and we see that actually there are 2 patterns. The uncompetitive and cursory type have less grade compared to the valedictorian, and the conscientious type, which surprises me, was the fact that actually the conscientious type, which is not that performing as the valedictorian one in terms of non-cognitive skills, has actually, it seems to have a little higher grade compared to the valedictorian one, while I was expecting actually the other way around, so the valedictorian being more performing in terms of grade, considering the non-cognitive skills. And then here I perform linear regression modeling, adding gender, migratory background, and ESES, and controlling for test score INVALSI and all the other controls. So here we see that at the uncompetitive type acting strange, because once I add the test score INVALSI and the other controls, the marginal effects goes up near the consensus type, more or less. So I'm not really interpreting the uncompetitive type, still thinking about it. But we see that for the cursory, the consensus, and the valedictorian type, even adding gender, migratory background, and ESES, the effects remain pretty much the same. While it's interesting that for gender, even controlling for the profile, so for the non-cognitive skills, female students has significantly higher grade with respect to male students, even when controlling for actual competencies and all the other controls. For migratory background, happens more or less the same, but the gap once introducing test score INVALSI reduces. So it seems like immigrant students has a lower grade compared to native students, while for ESCS, it's actually including non-cognitive skills and all the other controlled test score INVALSI and the control. The differences between having a lower ESCS and a higher ESCS is null in terms of grades. Here, what I do is interacting students' profile and gender, migratory background, and ESCS, and basically there are no significant effects at all, meaning that the effect of belonging to those profiles is stable across different groups. So in conclusion, I try to build profiles of students using 9 indexes and 35 items in total, and I identified 4 different types of students. I'm open to suggestions about new names for the profiles because I really struggled with them. And the composition of this profile is not random, so students are stratified across the profiles according to their gender, ESCS, and probably migratory background, but we can say that, with the exception of the uncompetitive profile. Valedictorian and consensus students have a higher grade compared to the uncompetitive and the cursory students, also when introducing students' ascriptive characteristics and all the other controls. There are no significant interaction terms, so the advantages of belonging to specific profile is stable across students belonging to different groups, even if the uncompetitive type, again, it's difficult to interpret. So, as a discussion, I propose this new perspective on the study of teacher grading practices, and there are some evidence on how students' social-emotional skills and non-cognitive skills may interplay and may affect teacher assessment. These skills are not randomly distributed, so some groups are more likely to display specific features and cognitive traits that may be highly rewarded in terms of grades by their teachers. So I think there might be some possible systematic group advantage that may adapt to and may confirm the teacher expectation bias. For example, the consensus girl that has the same grade as the valedictorian type despite the non-cognitive different distribution of non-cognitive skills. And finally, at the same time, belonging to a certain profile has a systematic effect of teacher grade over and above students' descriptive characteristics and students' academic ability, again with the exception of the uncompetitive student. Thank you for the attention.